So welcome back. I hope that the experience that you've had so far this morning has not only pushed you in your understanding of some of the foundational issues around social media for health professional educators, but that there's been a secondary positive benefit from being here is that building that network, what has been a virtual community, hopefully becoming a community of practice, that some of the scholarship that we'll see come out of our sessions today will be an impetus one way, but there'll be connections for future scholarship, future work to advance this emerging field, to encourage and shape and form this disruptive technology. For those of you watching on the podcast, thank you for participating. We've seen lots of traffic, and it's exciting to realize that our conversation is not limited to the geographical space here. We have a few housekeeping issues. Well, I guess we'll keep up your slides. The first is I hope you've downloaded the ICRE app. It will be helpful to evaluate the session. The second is, I think, in knowing this community, I'm sure you've seen that there has been an incident at Canadian Parliament. I don't think all the details are clear right now. Certainly there's been reports of shootings and some casualties, and many of the public spaces in Ottawa are under lockdown. I would reassure you to say that there doesn't seem to be any concern that we should have here, but to just acknowledge that we don't have all the details, but certainly our thoughts are with those who are involved in this situation and recognizing what a concerning time it is. And so our thoughts are certainly going out for them. It's often difficult to segue and transition from that, but I also want to speak to some of the things that we can look forward to this afternoon. So in a minute, I'm going to introduce Michelle Lynn. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about the sessions this afternoon. There will be an opportunity for you to participate in a session looking at how does education theory inform what we do as educators in social media platforms. And so we're going to use for that the hashtag SoMeSummit4. And another theory that looks at scholarship. How do we define scholarship in social media? And how do we champion it at our institutions so that we can positively influence our field and encourage our colleagues and move the training of our learners forward? And so that will be followed by hashtag SoMeSummit3. And then the last piece is to say that if you're following along and keeping score at home, I guess on Simpler, it's pretty amazing to see kind of the data that we've attracted already. We're over 1,000 tweets. Jason Frank, who may have the gift of polydactyly, is our top tweeter. Our second tweeter, because I haven't seen her here in the room, is in Chapel Hill right now. And so this really is an opportunity to engage not only people who are here, but people and part of our broadest community. So I find those kind of data points very interesting. You've heard enough from me. Let's turn our attention to Michelle. Michelle Lynn is an emergency physician, so I have a warm affection for emergency physicians in this community. Michelle is an associate professor at the University of California, San Francisco, and is the editor-in-chief of what started as a blog, but now I call an all-encompassing digital empire called Academic Life in Emergency Medicine. To put this in context, it was an initiative that was started probably out of her basement or her closet or her kitchen, much like all technologies, and has blossomed into something that has multiple authors and editors. They would receive around 50,000 unique visitors per month, with over 1 million people unique visits annually, engaging with a whole realm of educational resources. Michelle is going to talk to us about how we as health professions educators should use social media to enhance our educational curricula. Michelle.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, I get the distinct privilege of talking after a delicious lunch when all brain power goes to the stomach, all blood flows down. But I will do my best to try to engage you when I think is a fascinating topic. I love this topic. I could go ad nauseum about it, but I've now cut it down to 50 minutes. So this topic is on how health profession individuals or educators should use social media. And I don't need to tell you guys how to do this, but what I want to do is try to spark some discussion with some of the language I have, and possibly to help you get some language to go back to your institution to prove why educators need to adopt social media. Right? And I think we're all on the same page with that, but maybe we need to build our brand in terms of how we need to sell this, because we all know it's the right thing to do, and we are not anywhere near where we should be. So just a disclosure form, nothing to disclose, and I would like to start with the initial slide of, let's step back here, right? There is no greater time and no better profession right now than being an educator. This is the best thing in the world. You don't have to pay me to do this, right? Ideally, you should please pay me. But you don't need to pay me to do this. This is the best thing in the world. And so I actually, to be meta about this, since I knew this was going to be a social media summit, I put out a question on Twitter. You may have seen it a while ago, and you guys are still welcome to comment on this, and we'll see if the back channel blows up. But the question is, why are you a medical educator? Maybe we can attack this from a different way of getting to the emotions of this. And interestingly, when I first posted this out, lots of comments came through, but I wanted to highlight to you some of the big ticket and great answers that came out. And so Simon Carley from the UK came back saying, well, because change as a result of education is exponential and the greater than any one person or individual can deliver to patients they see, right? It's scalable, it's exponential. Manrique Unama, who I have never met before, from Costa Rica, an emergency physician, says it's our duty, our responsibility, and our privilege. Right? This is the best thing in the world. Ken Milne from Skeptic's Guide, he's also from Canada, and to use from Dead Poet Society, a great quote, which is from Walt Whitman. It says, a powerful play goes on, and that I may contribute a verse. Right? This is our way of putting our stamp on the world of medical education. This is why we do the things. And in essence, if you boil everything down, what they're all trying to say is, we want to make a difference. Right? This is why it's so great. And so now if we step back, when I first started into the faculty role out of residency in 2001, and basically, all of you guys are great mentors, right? And I'm sure you sat down people and said, listen, here's how you play the academic game. You get in, you put your head down, you do your shifts, but you got to do some lecturing, you got to do some mentoring, you got to go get published in a PubMed index journal, write some reviews, repeat cycle. Right? And then you move up in the ladder rank. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. I can do it. And so that's what I did. I joined the lecture circuit and talked about what's called clinical tricks of the trade. And then, a couple of national talks here and there, started getting published. And that's where I was at about 2009, and where I'm like, I'm starting to see the landscape of medical education, which is there are three pods of people. One, by far the biggest, are the clinician educators, which is many of us here. Right? These are the superstars of education, where when you give a talk, people quote what you say, and you're like, oh my gosh, did you hear what they said about how you manage X, Y, and Z? You guys are the superstars of education. But then there's also education scholars who you can't do without, to try to ask the hard questions of like, is what I'm doing effective? And thinking about this in a scholarly way. And then there's this little teeny group that was just a whisper, just started cropping up around 2009. We are the digital innovators who are interested in education. They may not actually be in academics. And so if you overlay, well, who do the academics value? What do the promotions and tenures committee, who do they value? Well, it is kind of this upper half. And that was the landscape of what we were dealing with. And to put a cartoon of myself, I kind of sat at this little intersection point and happy in my little world. I'm like, okay, things are going well. But then I started getting evaluations back from my national talks, and they're like, listen, what you're talking about is really not that new. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? They're like, well, I just read about it on your blog like last week, and we actually had a whole conversation. And I'm like, but this is my stuff, though. I'm like, I'm not like reproducing other people's stuff. So I'm like, maybe is there a better way to reach our learners than every 2 or 3 times a year going to locations where it's convenient for me to disseminate, but it's not convenient for the learner to access? And I'm realizing there was a huge shift around 2009 for me, where I said, maybe I can do this better and get it onto blogs and get it out to people in a very timely fashion, right? And as around then, actually, I pulled the plug and said, you know what, I'm getting off of most of my lecture circuits. And my bosses thought I was crazy. You are crazy. I am crazy, but it's independent of this statement of like, I got to get off the lecture circuit and figure out a different way of delivering information out there. And so there I was. I realized the current climate was, well, the learners are currently here with the superstars, the clinical educators. But what happened was, where are we in 2014, today, right? Well, you can get a sense, since 2009, we actually did a study recently in emergency medicine and showed the explosion of the number of podcasts and blogs out there. There are right now over probably 220 out there that we know of that are disseminating free, open access medical education content. And so what happens is, starting in about 2009, I started seeing the digital innovation educator bubble start to expand, right? Where do the learners go? Oh, they're leaving the mothership, right? They're moving towards the digital educators because they just gravitate towards easy to access free information. And then so now I am at this vertex. You're like, I'm clearly in the blogging realm, and I think this is where we are currently in 2014. And academia, unfortunately, is still valuing the top half. So how do we reconcile those differences? So first of all, I realized that once I left the lecture circuit, the superstardom also follows kind of where the learners go, right? The learners are listening to people. I can't tell you how many times on shift people go like, did you hear that podcast where they talked about X, Y, and Z or the newest findings? They are glued to the social media content, at least in the field of emergency medicine as learners. So the learners are moving, the superstars are moving, no longer needing to go through the usual ladder ranks of, give lectures, PubMed index journal publication. The superstars right now almost usually right out of residency who are hosting these platforms, and the learners are gravitating to them, right? It's a whole new model, a disruptive model, as we like to say, right? So where are you currently, and why aren't you on this bottom half is my question. And my vision for 2016, if you can kind of project a little further, like what would be your best sense of what you'd like 2016 to look like? Or for me, I think there's still some disconnects, but I would love to see fixed. So here's the current scenario, right? Superstars at the bottom, the learners are with the superstars or the new superstars, academic value up top. I would love to see this world of digital education come up and kind of envelop the clinician educator. I think the modern educator now needs to be completely digitally savvy of all the platforms out there. And I think, I have a couple of Luddite friends in my department, and they're like, so social media, it's like the internet. It may just go away at some point, right? I mean, I could just wait it out. I'm like, it is not going away, my friend. Social media is here to stay. Embrace it. Figure out what it's all about, because that's where our learners are, and we need to be equally adept in navigating that space. So we've moved up. Hopefully in 2016, we will envelop this clinician educator pool. We'll pull the learners back up into the academic realm. But in addition to that, I would love to see academia as an institution come down and start to embrace what we're doing. Right? It's all great in theory, but this is what I would love to see, and I do challenge this group here. I think this is the group to kind of move things forward, or that international panel of experts. But this is what I envision the future of 2016 being, and I think we're making great strides like today to move that forward. And so there's actually a couple of people, actually a lot of people, who are living this world in the digital space right now. So I put out another Twitter question that says, well, why are you, as a very busy educator, why are you participating in social media, right? The most common thing we hear is like, I don't have time for Twitter. I don't have time for Twitter. You're like, well, why are these busy people doing it? And so Rob Rogers, who I think is watching from Maryland right now, he says, well, alone I'm pretty smart, but together we're brilliant. Right? I thought that was a really great quote. Another guy named Christopher Madday, who I've never met before, I think is a PA in Alabama. And he says, it's all about global reach. We no longer can think about silos, and we can reach not only in the classroom, but globally, and anyone who wants to learn, really. And Pat Rich, right, he's the managing editor here of CMA. He says that, as someone who's not actually a medical educator, it allows me to engage in discussions that I would never have been able to be a part of, right? It's a flattened yet bigger community of practice. And then Teresa Chan here says, it creates a flattened world where voices are given a similar voice. So I think all of these things come together, and it still boils down to the same message, right? We want to make a difference, but we want to make a difference where the learners are, but also as a part of a global community. I think is a little bit different than what the answer was before, was just, we just want to make a difference, all right? But there's no one listening. So you got to go where the learners are. And a great quote actually summarizes this. If you guys read Natives, Digital Immigrants, and this guy by Mark Prensky says, today's students are no longer the people our educational system was designed to teach. I'm like, that is so true. When was this written, this quote? 2001. Why haven't we gotten any much further? It's mind-boggling. Like he identified this so eloquently. We need to push this agenda forward, and I don't think we can wait for institutions to move it forward. I think it's we as a collaborative group of like-minded individuals, we need to push that ahead. So hopefully, you've bought into this movement clearly. You're here at the summit. How can I get started in the social media movement? And I'm trying to give you some dialogue for you to start with when you're broaching, for instance, your dean's office, people you want to get buy-in from. And what I like to kind of often offer them is, I love movies. There's a great movie quote from The Matrix. It says, you take the blue pill, this is going to be the shortest talk ever, and we'll just end it right here. But if you do the red pill, stay in Wonderland, I will show you how deep this rabbit hole goes. And so it's from The Matrix. It really, if you're willing to invest a little time, we can share with you the world of possibilities. And so you can't really tell where you want to go until, from an individual level, where you have started. And this whole issue is about digital brand identity, right? Think about to your institution or that you represent, or go back to like yourself as a faculty member. What is your current digital brand identity? Because frankly, all the world's a stage, as Shakespeare says. And right now, in let's say 2009 to currently, the stage is owned by institutions, CME conference organizers. They're the ones to tell, like, okay, this is the sage on stage. This is the person who is the expert. We have put a spotlight on that person, right? And they have full control. There's a lot of gatekeeper effect. But what happens with social media? What's different about it? There are a million spotlights. How is a learner to figure out, in this noise of spotlights, who to actually focus on as the expert, right? So I think it's super important on this stage, where it's now very crowded, for you as an educator to brand yourself as a trusted entity. You want to make sure that of all those lights, the brightest light is on you. So you can try to differentiate yourself from a signal to noise ratio. And you do that first by figuring out what your current identity looks like. And it's a quick thing, right? Everyone's online right now. Google search yourself. Put your name in, put your specialty in, see what pops up in the top 5 things, right? And I don't know if Leslie is around. Flynn. So anyway, hey, what? So I just did a quick Google search of her, and she actually has a great digital profile, digital identity. And you can see the top 5 things came up. The first one, I believe, sorry, no glasses, is a profile from her university website. It's a bio, right? And she has a great other references. She's named, what is it? Vicene of Education. Congratulations, by the way. So there's a lot of things spoken about her from news agencies, from her own website. But think about it. How much of this information does she own in terms of the digital footprint that she's trying to deliver, right? Not much, except for Twitter. She has an amazing followership, and she has a very active Twitter account. So that's ownership of your identity. But everything else, think about it, it's what other people are saying about you. Another example, speaking of a co-conspirator, Ali, who's standing right next to her, I looked up his, and his is very similar, a very robust identity. But what I really did love, if you look at the third one, I believe, is from about.me. And this is it's a website that you can sign up to customize so that you have full control over your CV, your curriculum vitae, right? So you can see what Ali's look like. It looked amazing, and I think I'm going to get some ideas to replicate yours. But his is a beautiful website. He has full autonomy of what he puts on there. This is how you contact him, and if you want to engage with him, these are the different avenues that you can get at him. It's got everything except short of like your home address, right? So think about it. This is your way of kind of taking ownership of your digital footprint. So now while you're doing that, we should have like the best Google search results possible contest. But right now, what about digital identity? Let's say, great, I've assessed it now. Well, now what? How do I fix it? How do I improve it? Is this the right thing? And thanks to Rob Cooney here, who introduced me to this book, which I thought was fascinating. And it's not even in medical education. It's about a guy who said, it's a Michael Hyatt, who wrote the idea of platforms and how to get noticed and a sea of noise. Right? That's essentially what we're trying to do now with so many sites popping up. How are learners to know me from a person off the street? Like, everyone looks kind of the same at first glance. How do you amplify your signal? And he had this great definition of what's called a social media framework, which means to grow your identity. This is a three-pronged approach. This is not something you do immediately. This is something you strive towards over time. But it's nice to know kind of the trajectory that you want to work towards. And the 3 prongs include the following. The first is a home base. Have a site that you have autonomy over, something that you own. So usually that's a website, a static website, a blog, a website with a podcast, something, right? There's also something called embassies. Embassies are basically sites that you don't own, but you have a registered profile. You want to have an identity established. And usually the minimum 5 that I think about from a medical educator standpoint are these, right? Twitter, which you guys are all on. Facebook, whether you use it a lot or not, you usually have some sort of identity on there. LinkedIn, such as for our social media summit, ResearchGate, and Google Scholar. Those are the kind of the big 5 that I've seen most people participate in. And the last one I hadn't actually thought about, and I recently subscribed to, which is the idea of outposts. And you're like, what are outposts? Outposts are a way for you to monitor the web for any mention of something that you want to track, right? And specifically about your identity. What about, like, well, I want to know if anyone mentions me or my blog. And so Google Alert System is a free platform, a free service. You just go to google.com/alerts, and you type in whatever you want to track. And then about a daily basis, it will compile stuff if anyone's mentioned you, right? And this is kind of an outpost or a listening post that is push technology. You don't need to go chasing after stuff. Google's going to do this for you. And this boils it down into a 3-pronged approach. Home base, embassies, outposts. Right, so I think the easiest thing when you're trying to get people in your community to engage and you show them this framework, I think the easiest entry point, as you may well agree, is probably Twitter, right? You sign up, you give them some really great instructions like, get a professional identity. Don't just say it's, Sam 2014, because next year it'd be like, that's a really weird Twitter handle, right? And so you want to be thoughtful about something that's going to be timeless, representative of you. Be thoughtful about have a professional photo. Don't have an egg. Don't have you kind of drinking beer. Lurk a couple of days, right? And then start contributing to this community of practice that we've already built. So provide expertise, ask questions, model what a lifelong learner looks like, because I don't think they have enough good role models out there currently. So how do I add value in Twitter? I struggled with this when I first joined in 2009, and I was like, I don't know about this whole Twitter thing. I'm following Oprah. It's all right. It's kind of inspirational. But most of the times, I think now the way I use it is probably to announce new things that have come up from a clinical standpoint, announce kind of some timely announcements. But it's great for co-creating knowledge. And I think the one example that cinched it in my head of like, I am here, and I am going to use Twitter, and I'm here to stay, period. And the example is this in about 2009, 10. Interesting, I think Seth is actually here. So MD Aware, a couple of years ago, said, hey, there's a new use for a bougie. He's from New York, and he CC'd a bunch of people. And by the way, why didn't you CC me? I'm not sure. And a bunch of people, so you'll see New York. Then it was like, hey, sorry, this font is so small. Oh, it says, hey, EM Crit from New York also says, hey, isn't it too short? I'm not sure. Someone woke up from Queensland again. This is probably like 20, 30 minutes later. There's a whole conversation that occurs around in Texas. And then we're back to New York again. Someone woke up from Hennepin in Minnesota and said, hey, I got a picture of it. I'm just in the ED right now. Let me shoot a picture for you what it looks like. And literally, I woke up maybe 2 hours later. I'm like, what the heck happened? This is a great conversation. How do I get in on this? Because I write the Clinical Tricks of the Trade blog, and I say, hey, I want to feature this. Who should I credit this to? And it's like, oh, it's the Twitter Mind Meld from Australia. And it's like, okay, great. And there's a guy in California who's like, oh, I'm going to beat Michelle to it, and took a picture in the sim lab, posted it. I'm like, oh man, this is still only like 4 hours later. I'm like, I'm so behind. And so here's the picture, and the blog post went up a couple of days later. right? Like, this is what Twitter is for when it really works. So just an example for you about how you can co-create knowledge on Twitter. If people are asking for an example, because when you say co-create knowledge, you're like, yeah, I don't really know what that means. This is what I mean. All right, so another thing about Twitter briefly is that not all tweets are created equally. So as you kind of get more advanced in Twitter, just know that they're not all created equally. And there's a fascinating study by Twitter of 2 million tweets, and says, well, let's assume that how do we show value in a tweet? Well, we can assume that value is suggested by the number of engagements, which is suggested by the number of retweets, right? And you're like, okay, I can follow that logic. So by Twitter's definition, value is added when you include one of 5 things in your tweet. And these are the 5 that will increase the percentage of retweets. So if you have a hashtag, right, you can do that, SoMe Summit, a video link URL. If you actually have a number, fascinatingly, it gets retweeted more often. If you put in a quote, or you put a photo URL. And I challenge this group today to put all 5 in one tweet. Think about it. All right, so for those naysayers in academia, and I still have a bunch in our group, which is like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but really Twitter seems pointless in real academia, right? This is, bad thing to say. But how can you really justify? I think you got to start talking the language. So one, you're like, have you seen that study in Journal of Medical Internet Research about how Twitter citations or tweetations can actually predict highly cited articles in journals, right? Now Twitter is breaking into the traditional PubMed index peer-reviewed journal world, right? There's now some linkage. They're like, what? It makes a difference? Is there some relevance between the two? We talked about altmetrics earlier in the other consensus group about how altmetrics is not just taking kind of news blogs, news items as signs of engagement, but also Twitter mentions, right? It's all factored in now into the modern age of alternative metrics for impact. And then if that doesn't work, you say, listen, it's all about a virtual community of practice. Who we hang out with now on Twitter would never have been possible with kind of our current modalities, which is like in the hallways of our institution at every once or twice a year conference where we travel, we kind of brainstorm with people, and then we kind of left to our own devices afterwards. Community practice is amazing, and I have an amazing kind of kick-ass team. Am I allowed to say kick-ass? My bad. I have an amazing kick-ass team. I was going to say it again. Amazing team that I work with virtually. Half of them I just met today, who I've been working with for a year, who are just incredibly capable in what they do. And just realize they're not actually all physicians, right? The first guy here, Brian, he's a PharmD in Maryland. We got Teresa here. We got Brent here from Canada. Nikki Joshi at Stanford. They're all fairly fresh out of residency. This is the new generation of medical educators that we are grooming, right? Salim's in Texas. I think he's on watching. Scott Kobner is a New York med student. Sam Sheikh is a Detroit resident. And even now, like I have Derek Sifford, he's a paramedic who is applying to be in medical school. He was like one of our most capable editors on the site. So really, our virtual community of practice has expanded way beyond what we could have previously imagined. Right? And if it's this community that in the past 12 months, you can think we're actually breaking into the journal world, right? And we're trying to say, hey, this team makes a difference. We work virtually. Many of us have not even met. Actually, many of us are meeting each other on Tuesday at a meeting. And we can get things done. And this has significant impact on our work-life careers. Right, so Twitter, when you first glance at it, it's a world of chaos. But I think it's what you use and what you do out of it to create your community of practice that really will make a difference in your academic career. All right, so shifting gears, let's say, I have established my identity on Twitter, like all of us here. Now what? And this is the step where people kind of go in different directions. And I put some thought into this. I thought, well, maybe we shouldn't be all virtual hammers. And what I mean by that is, we're all great at Twitter, kind of like a hammer. Like right now, let's say you teach in a classroom, everything is problem-based learning. If any problem comes up, so like let's teach about, palliative care. You're like, let's do problem-based learning. Well, let's talk about anaphylaxis. Let's do problem-based learning, right? If it is a hammer, all you're going to see is a nail, right? For Twitter, same thing. If you just know Twitter, that's your only solution to everything digital. So I recommend get in there and get immersed in a wiki, a Google Doc thing like you did at the consensus session this morning. Join a discussion forum, host a podcast, post a podcast, see what that's like. Join a Google Hangout on air, publish it, see what that's like and see what the damage is. So you can figure out what all the nuances of the positives and negatives are. And so what you can, instead of being a hammer, I think you can be a digital Swiss Army knife, right? You want to be very savvy in how these different platforms work so you can apply it to the right situation at hand, right? Don't be a hammer, please. So with that, I think the next step is once you've felt more comfortable with that, the next step, I think, is to build that home base and the social media framework. And that can be blog, podcast, website. And someone mentioned it here before, but content is king. And so you got to always keep that in mind. No matter how flashy of a design you have, you got to make sure you have something of value to add. And so for me, I think the blogging world is kind of my area of interest. And I wanted to share with you a couple of things about best practices for blogs. For those of you guys just starting out or those who are actively involved, I think there's a lot of great resources that people don't talk about that's actually outside of the education literature. So first, I went to the blogging world. I'm like, okay, what are best practices of blogging from people who do this for a living, right? They're very driven by engagement and metrics. And, the 5 probably top things I hear from them is, 1, you got to post with regularity, right? If you post, once today, once in 2 months, 5 in a row, how is a learner to know if, is this a stagnant site? Are we still going on? You got to keep a lot of regularity to build your readership. Now, the second is, in addition to kind of not looking stagnant, whenever someone replies on your blog site, you got to respond pretty timely. And timely, I think, can be anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. And I think our team is so hypomanic. We answered about 24 to 48 seconds. Yeah, so I think because you all get notified, right, on our comments button, you get an email that, hey, someone just replied to you. So I think timeliness is a big thing to show people that, hey, you're engaged. I want to hear what you're thinking about. Let's start a dialogue. The third thing is spelling and grammar. It seems so simple, but I can't tell you how many sites have typos, and you're like, well, if they're not spell checking, how do I know their content is accurate? So the two go hand in hand. It's just a simple thing that can ruin the credibility of your site. The fourth thing is to announce your new posts through embassies. And so because, like we said, everything is globalized now in education, you got to think that way when you're using your embassy. So for our blog post, we send it out at 3 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time in California. And then at 8 a.m., I send out a Twitter announcement, hey, there's a new blog post. And then at 1 p.m., there's a Facebook post that goes out. And then Google Plus is whenever I remember, sometime in the afternoon or evening, I post. And so this kind of around the world, I think you're more kind of catering to the global community to kind of get that announcement out there. And the last thing is never plan anything until you know how to potentially measure things. And I think that's something we have all learned over time, right? I can build it. How do I know if I'm successful? How do I know if I'm growing? What are people reading? Is it only half of the stuff? All of it? I don't know. So Google Analytics is a fantastic feature that is out there. It's free, and you link it to your blog, and it gives you both real-time stats and searchable stats, kind of like the simpler website. You can search however you want all the raw data. And you can see over time, this is about a 1 year's worth of tracking data, page views. You can even get down to the individual day, time frame. You can get down to the hour. You can look at the number of countries involved, which cities mostly view you. You can kind of tailor things accordingly, which posts are most important. I think Google Analytics is something we definitely underutilize when we're talking about social media. Now, another world which I recently learned about in terms of blogging is this world of user experience research, right? This is a new age kind of a job where you go out there and goes, how exactly are users engaging with your platform, your product? And there's one great group called Nielsen Norman Group who exactly looks at how people interact with digital sites, websites. And one of the series that they have, I just want to probably just highlight one of them, but they have an amazing series of eye tracking data. And so all that, I don't know how they do this. They slap some things on your eyeballs and then they just see where your eyes go. But they track it over time and they create this beautiful heat map. And they say digital readers now use F-style reading. The age of the typewriter, read every line and every word across is over in website writing. It is all f-stop. People are going to skim down to the right, down and to the right. And these are different forms of websites, and you see that the f-style reading and writing apply to all of them. And so they said, well, how can you get people to slow down and prevent it being a straight, I writing, where they just go straight down the bottom? How do you get them to slow down and move to the right? And they said there's two things. One, generous use of subheaders, because you prime them to know that, hey, this whole topic is going to be on a topic that I'm really going to be interested in. I'm going to slow down and read that part. And the other is this etiquette of, how you're supposed to spell out words in journal articles? Numbers. Numbers are key. They will slow down if you have numbers. That was really fascinating. So anyways, a whole series of eye tracking data. Look at the site. This way is to help you engage your blogging audience more. And the third one I think is going to be interesting for this group, but there's a lot of educational theories out there. My favorite is Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia design. I think the small group session is going to talk more about theories, but I just want to introduce this one, which essentially, if you boil it down to, is content is king, design is queen. This is the book that goes along with it. It's a great quick read, especially because they're all short chapters. You can find what you're looking for. And in essence, kind of to boil it down in my simple mind, learning can be divided into two processes, a dual processing pathway. So one is you process things through the auditory channel and then the visual channel. Right? So then you create a verbal and a pictorial model. And then these two buckets, if you fill it up with enough cognitive load, nothing else is going to stick. So you want to maximize both buckets, pull them together, and that is your working memory. Right? So you want to maximize both. Don't lose out on either one to maximize learning. So there's two principles I can give you examples of. And one is called the coherence principle, which says that, on your site, website, whatever, get rid of any extraneous information that you have. Why do you have a dancing monkey in the corner? You just filled up a little more of that bucket. While funny, you have now lost some potentially important information that could have been in the bucket. Right? So you have a coherence principle, only put relevant information on your screen. All right, so here's an example. So Dr. Issa is a surgeon who I've talked with a little bit, but he has these two great studies, co-authored by Mayer, actually, who gave talks in surgery to students and says, I'm going to talk about the same thing, same content. The only thing I'm going to change is they're my slides. That's it. And he actually showed that the immediate and delayed learning retention was improved just by changing the slides based on Mayer's principles. And he said there's a couple of examples in his papers of before, bunch of text, after kind of the flow chart, and then you use the audio channel to talk about it, and you maximize these two pathways. Same thing, bunch of text, 3 pictures, that's it. Right, so it kind of revolutionized the way I kind of thought about how to present information. This also works if you're redesigning slides as well. I think it's now a design-centered world as we move forward. Second principle is called signaling principle. I mentioned to it before, which is, gone are the days you look at this, you're not supposed to be able to read this, but you look at it and how many of you are incentivized to read this whole thing? Yeah, none of you, right? It's just a hodgepodge of random text. But if you had headers, you know where to skip to figure out where your information, your relevant information is, right? So signaling principle is very key as we figure out how we deliver information in the digital world. So now I kind of want to switch gears, and this is kind of where we all are, I think, as a collective group, which is great. We've bought into Twitter, we've figured out our identity, we're trying to amplify our signal, but what's the next movement in social media? And I think what's exciting about being here is figuring out quality, right? And we talked about it briefly in the morning session, and we're also going to be talking about it in the afternoon, specifically around building credibility in academia, using the language of digital scholarship. How do we get our education colleagues to be on the same page with us, right? And so I wanted to highlight a couple of things we're working on as a group, and I'm just part of an amazing kick-ass team. I said it again, an amazing team. The things we're working on is kind of fascinating, which is one, we initially started out with, Brent Thoma is here who created this concept of the social media index, which says the power is in the crowds, period. Right? Follow the power of the crowd. So the social media index basically brings together 4 very public metrics that anyone could run, and you can figure out who are the most quote-unquote impactful social media blogs out there. And right now, we're still working on manuscript getting in, but it's unpublished data right now. Hope you don't mind me sharing a little bit, which is, you know, if you actually run journal websites through this SMI index, looking at their websites, and you try to see, well, how does that look compared to traditional metrics of impact factors, right? All the different metrics. How do they correlate? They actually correlate pretty well, which is really interesting. So can we extrapolate that and say, well, then maybe impacts of blogs can be used using the social media index? I know. Take a moment, absorb that, right? Anyway, so the power of the crowd, we're working on the social media index, and then we look forward to any of your comments down the road. The second thing we already talked about today, which is we ran a modified Delphi of the bloggers and podcasters in emergency medicine, and we came up with those quality indicators we talked about, and we actually came up with very, very similar quality indicators that you guys just came up with this morning, and then we'll post all this stuff in the LinkedIn group to show you exactly how we compare and contrast. And then the third thing, which kind of got launched off the ground, but we thought was really fascinating, which is in residency training right now in emergency medicine, we have to do 5 hours of didactics per week, right? Conference time, kind of like your half-day sessions. And we're allowed that 1 out of those 5 hours can be done asynchronously, however you want. And I'm like, oh, wow, how do we do that? And but the problem is everyone's reading blogs, podcasts, but they're having a hard time referring residents to, like, well, what are the high quality blogs? What do I point them to? Because there's so many. There's 220 now out there. What do I point them to? And so actually we gathered a group of people together. There's 9 of us. Most of us are in the graduate medical education realm, and said, well, let's create 5 domains, have them score a set of blogs and podcasts using just a 5-domain scale. And we're right now looking at validity and reliability criteria, but it's showing that we can really identify high-quality blogs and podcasts out there that we can direct residents to. Anyway, just a little primer of, I think there's a lot of us working on trying to figure out this quality question. Just because it seems like a daunting and impossible task doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to tackle this issue, right? It's too important for that. So now moving on, there's quality assessment, but then there's also the issue of academic credibility, right? This is the kind of partly the bane of my existence, which is, you know, all that we do does not really count for much in the world of academia. So we kind of had to lead double lives and kind of still play the game of traditional academia. But how great would that be if our 2 worlds could join, right? And I think that's going to be the secret to the sustainability of social media education. And I just want to whet your appetite. There is a great book, which I'm almost done with, by Martin Weller, which is called The Digital Scholar. And it's all about how technology is transforming, like Anne-Marie mentioned, transforming academic practice, right? And interestingly, doesn't this feel a little similar to something that happened in 1990? Right? What happened in 1990? Educators were all up in arms that they were a second-class citizen to researchers, right? Ernest Boyer in 1990 put out, well, a statement or a paper, a landmark paper, which just said, well, let's just put everyone on the same ground and define scholarship in one of 4 ways, right? Discovery, integration, application, scholarship of teaching, right? We're trying to bring educators up to the standards of researchers. Doesn't this kind of feel like what we're doing, traditional educators and digital educators? How can we bring everyone on the same page so that we are able to so that we can talk the same language and be measured against kind of similar metrics? And one metric maybe we could talk about in your session I bring up is Glassic standards of scholarship. All right, there's 6 criteria. You can look at it. You can totally nerd out more about it. But I just want to, these are the 6 elements you generally try to demonstrate to prove scholarship. But those 3 that are in blue is where I think digital education is really going to be able to excel beyond what is currently there, right? Because let's say you put out a blog post that is well-referenced, high quality, gets some stamp of approval. Is it publicly disseminated? Absolutely. It's a public blog. You can't really say that of people who, let's say, teach a course at a university. It's not really public. Is it peer-reviewed? Absolutely. We can debate ad nauseum about post-publication peer review. You can actually give Google Analytic numbers. You know, I think there's a lot of data behind this. And then it's a usable platform that other people can build upon. Absolutely. This is open access. All right, so these are the 3 elements, I think, where digital media is really going to excel. And so I wanted to end here that, you know, again, another movie quote, one of my favorite. right? With great power comes great responsibility. And that's no more true as in social media. But I'm glad we're taking more of a positivist approach to this, which is, with, you talk about responsibility, HIPAA, all equality issues. Frankly, it is opening up a world of unlimited opportunities that we can be at the forefront of. And I think that is really, really exciting. And so I want to leave with a challenge to you, right, which is take the red pill, right, teach with reach, be the digital Swiss Army knife, and then help us develop quality standards in advancing digital scholarship. And so to end with the beginning, which is there's no better time and no greater job than being an educator, I would like to change that up. So there's no better, greater job than being an educator in this social media world today. I thank you, and I'm sure the learners will thank you as well. Thank you. Gratuitous animation. My bad. Questions, thoughts, solutions to quality? Yes.
That was great. Something I struggle with in
Can you just wait for the mic so that people playing at home can...
Hi.
Hey.
Something that I struggle with a little bit in my institution is we're out in BC. We don't actually have much of a social media presence. There's a few individuals, but you talked a lot about kind of having your platform, your website, your blog, and what we're a little bit more interested in is how can we kind of use other people's, the content that's already out there, the information that's out there, and I feel that that would be a way that I would more easily engage people who are a little bit more reluctant. Is there a way, do you have any opinion on a way to kind of use all those resources and get people engaged where the idea of actually constructing a blog or constructing a website or having that for themselves is a little much because we don't have the critical mass that would be needed to do that?
You're right. I mean, the question is about the idea of curation as a earlier step before you actually do content creation. Because I agree with you, it is a lot to deal with, especially those who are technologically averse. And I think curation is definitely there's a role for that. I think you got to figure out. You got to have enough savvy people to navigate and figure out where the signal is amongst the noise, and you can curate it. And the question is now if ultimately you want to try to brand yourself as a curator, and the question is if you just curate, it's a very nebulous thing. You want to try to own this curation. I think there's a lot of platforms out there. I think Ali has one too, right? Is a tweet story that you put it on, or I think there's a way you can curate it and then put it onto something where you have a registered account, or paper.li, right? You create a nice little digital newspaper and say, hey, this is my curated list. Subscribe to this. And so in a way, you're content producing with a product, and you're not just a nebulous phenomenon. Because I think it's about building identity. Sorry, I can't look at this animation. It's about building identity, a little step at a time. That's a great question.
Workshop on digital curation on Saturday.
It's a great question. It's crystal clear.
Any questions? Michelle doesn't talk to any of you after this. No.
Thanks.
I'm going to say a few things. Thank you, Michelle. As I listen to what you talk about, when you hear what you've done, you're very intimidating. To see all that you've done with what seems like minimal resources to what is having a transformative influence within the education community, but certainly within emergency medicine. The anecdote I like to tell that when I started on faculty at McMaster, I used to say things like, this is what we should do. And I basically carried down that one-person chain of, well, we do it this way because I was taught at the University of Toronto to do it this way, and this is how we do it. And then there was a switch about 3 or 4 years ago. I would say, well, this is what we're going to do in this patient care decision, and they say, that's not what Dr. Lynn says. I was like, who is this Dr. Lynn? And get her on the phone so I can talk to her. And it turned out that the influence was happening not even within my home hospital or home institution or even within my own country, but was happening with this mentorship from afar and this influence on a whole generation of next clinicians. But when I see what you have at the beginning, there's intimidation. But when you start to lay for us, these are the steps of starting from, I'm new to this field. How do I start to have an influence? You give us a very practical-minded but very high, rigorous approach in terms of taking what we have, an enthusiasm or a desire to influence our community and to influence learners for the hope of our patients, and do that in a collaborative way, in a transformative way, in an innovative and novel way. So thank you for helping us to learn from all the lessons I think you've picked up as you've built this this big
dynasty.
influence, this dynasty.
Yes.
All right. Thanks.